Asterisk, asterisk, Part 1. The blood-soaked West, asterisk, asterisk. The Arizona Territory in 1876 was a land that God seemed to have forgotten halfway through creation. Red dust devils danced across the endless expanse of sagebrush and mesquite, while the sun blazed down mercilessly on anyone foolish enough to venture out during midday. It was a place where civilization and wilderness met in violent collision, where the line between law and lawlessness blurred like heat mirages on the horizon. Eleanor Hayes stood in the doorway of her late father's apothecary, watching the dust settle from the latest cavalry patrol that had thundered through their small border town of Bitter Creek. At 24, she was what the townspeople called a spinster in the making, too educated for most men's comfort, too independent for their liking, and too useful to be completely shunned. Her auburn hair, pinned severely back in a practical bun, caught glints of copper in the harsh afternoon light. Miss Hayes called Samuel Morrison, the shopkeeper from across the street. "Best get inside. Word is there's been another skirmish with the Navajo near Devil's Canyon." Eleanor nodded, but didn't move. She'd heard the same warnings for the past 3 years since her father's death from consumption. The town lived in a constant state of fear. Fear of the Apache, fear of the Navajo, fear of Mexican bandits, fear of their own shadows. But Eleanor had discovered that fear was a luxury she couldn't afford, not when she was the only person within 50 miles who knew how to set a broken bone or treat a fever. The apothecary's shop was her inheritance and her prison. Shelves lined with brown glass bottles containing tinctures, powders, and mysterious compounds her father had taught her to prepare. The back room served as both storage and makeshift infirmary, where she'd stitched up more bullet wounds and knife gashes than she cared to count. The townspeople came to her when they were desperate, then whispered about her unnatural knowledge behind her back. As twilight approached, Eleanor began her evening routine, checking supplies, grinding herbs, preparing bandages. The work kept her hands busy and her mind from wandering to thoughts of the life she might have had back east, where her aunt had begged her to return after her father's death. But something held her here in this God-forsaken place. Perhaps it was stubbornness, perhaps duty to her father's memory, or perhaps simply the knowledge that she was needed, even if she wasn't particularly wanted. The sound of hoofbeats made her look up from her mortar and pestle. A lone rider appeared on the horizon, silhouetted against the dying light. As the figure drew closer, Eleanor's heart began to race. The horse was riderless, its saddle empty and askew. It was one of the cavalry mounts. She recognized the brand, and there was blood on the saddle. Without thinking, Eleanor grabbed her medical bag and stepped outside. The horse, a bay gelding, stopped in front of the water trough, its sides heaving with exhaustion. Fresh blood streaked its flank, though it didn't appear to be the animal's own. "Where's your rider?" she murmured, approaching slowly. The horse's eyes rolled white with fear, and it shied away from her touch. That's when she noticed the trail of blood leading back toward the desert. Common sense told her to alert the sheriff, to let the men handle whatever had happened. But Eleanor had learned that by the time the men got around to handling things, it was usually too late. She went back inside, grabbed a lantern, her father's old Navy Colt revolver, and a canteen of water. The blood trail led her about a quarter mile outside town, toward the ancient cottonwoods that marked the old riverbed. The sun had nearly set, painting the sky in shades of crimson and purple. Eleanor's boots crunched on the gravelly soil as she followed the increasingly heavy blood spots. She found him among the rocks, barely visible in the gathering darkness. At first, she thought he was dead. His body lay twisted at an unnatural angle, one arm flung out as if reaching for something. Blood had pooled beneath him, black in the dim light. Eleanor approached cautiously, the revolver ready. As she drew closer, she could see he wasn't wearing a cavalry uniform. Her lantern light revealed bronze skin, long black hair matted with blood and dirt, and traditional clothing, A Navajo warrior. Her hand tightened on the gun. Everything she'd been taught, every story she'd heard, screamed at her to turn back. The Navajo were the enemy, savage killers who'd slaughter white women without a second thought. But as she stood there, looking down at the broken body, all she saw was a human being who would die without help. A soft groan escaped his lips. Still alive? Eleanor knelt beside him, setting the lantern on a flat rock. The wound was bad. A bullet had torn through his left shoulder, and from the amount of blood, it might have nicked an artery. His breathing was shallow and rapid, his skin cold despite the desert heat. She had perhaps seconds to decide, leave him to die, as most would say he deserved, or try to save him and risk everything, her reputation, her safety, possibly her life. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. A healer's oath knows no color, no creed, no nation. We heal because we can, because we must. Working quickly, Eleanor pressed her folded shawl against the wound to slow the bleeding. The warrior's eyes fluttered open, dark and unfocused. He tried to pull away, but he was too weak. "Shh," she whispered. "I'm trying to help." His eyes found hers in the lamplight, and for a moment, they simply stared at each other across the vast divide of their worlds. There was intelligence in those eyes, she realized with a start, and pain that went beyond the physical. Eleanor made her decision. She couldn't move him far in his condition, but she couldn't leave him here either. The old barn behind the apothecary. It was used for storage now, rarely visited. She could hide him there, at least until he was stable enough to leave. Getting him there was another matter. He was tall and powerfully built. Despite his current state, Eleanor had to half drag, half carry him, stopping frequently to check that the bleeding hadn't worsened. He drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally muttering words in his own language. By the time she got him into the barn, Eleanor was exhausted and covered in blood. She lit another lantern and examined him more closely. Besides the shoulder wound, he had various cuts and bruises, and what looked like a graze from another bullet along his ribs. His weapons were gone, likely taken by whoever had shot him. Working by lantern light, Eleanor cleaned and dressed the wounds as best she could. The shoulder was the worst. The bullet was still lodged inside, and she'd have to remove it or risk infection. But not tonight. He'd lost too much blood already. As she worked, she studied his face. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30. His features were strong and angular, with high cheekbones and a proud nose. Even unconscious and wounded, there was something noble about him. "What am I doing?" she whispered to herself. Harboring an enemy warrior was madness. If anyone found out, but she couldn't bring herself to regret it, not when she remembered the intelligence in those dark eyes. The way he'd looked at her with surprise rather than hatred. She covered him with old horse blankets and left water within reach. Tomorrow she'd have to figure out how to get him food and proper medical supplies without arousing suspicion. Tomorrow she'd have to face the reality of what she'd done. As Eleanor made her way back to the shop, she tried to clean the blood from her hands and clothes. The town was quiet, most people already in their homes for the night. She slipped inside and locked the door, her heart still pounding. Through her window, she could see the cavalry camp on the edge of town, their fires burning bright against the darkness. Tomorrow they'd likely go looking for the missing Navajo warrior. They'd assume he'd died in the desert, his body taken by coyotes or buzzards. They'd never think to look in the barn of the spinster medicine woman who kept to herself and caused no trouble. Eleanor poured herself a glass of whiskey from her father's hidden stash, something she rarely did, and tried to steady her nerves. She'd crossed a line tonight, one that couldn't be uncrossed. Whatever happened now, her life in Bitter Creek would never be the same. Outside, the desert wind howled through the canyon walls, carrying with it the scent of sage and danger. And in the barn behind the apothecary, a Navajo warrior fought for his life, dependent on the mercy of a woman he'd been taught to see as an enemy. The blood-soaked West had many secrets, and Eleanor Hayes had just added one more to its collection. Asterisk, asterisk, part 2. Close your eyes, asterisk, asterisk. The fever came in the darkest hour before dawn. Eleanor had been checking on her patient every few hours, slipping through the shadows between her shop and the barn like a ghost. Each time she found him still breathing. She counted it as a small miracle. But now, as she pressed her hand to his burning forehead, she knew the real battle was just beginning. She'd seen men die from fever after bullet wounds. The body, weakened by blood loss, couldn't fight the infection that inevitably set in. Without proper medicine, without being able to move him to a clean bed, his chances were slim. Eleanor lit her lantern and examined the shoulder wound. Red streaks were already spreading from the entry point. Blood poisoning. She had to get that bullet out now, fever or no fever. Working quickly, she gathered what supplies she could carry without arousing suspicion. Clean cloth, a bottle of grain alcohol, forceps, needle and thread, and a leather strap. The laudanum she'd have to do without. Its absence would be noticed and questioned. The warrior was delirious, muttering in Navajo, his body trembling with chills despite the fever. Eleanor knew she had to work fast. She poured alcohol over her instruments and her hands, then gently turned him to get better access to the wound. "This is going to hurt," she whispered, though she doubted he could understand her in his current state. She placed the leather strap between his teeth. "Bite down on this." The moment her forceps entered the wound, his eyes flew open. The pain had cut through his delirium like a blade, those dark eyes fixed on hers, wide with agony and confusion. "I'm sorry," Eleanor said, her own hands shaking. "I have to get the bullet out or you'll die. Try to stay still." He held her gaze, and she saw the moment understanding dawned. Instead of fighting, he bit down on the leather and gave an almost imperceptible nod. Eleanor worked as quickly as she dared, probing for the bullet while trying to cause as little additional damage as possible. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the cool night air. The warrior's body was rigid with pain, but he didn't cry out, didn't struggle. His eyes never left her face. There, she felt the forceps catch on something hard. Carefully, she extracted a misshapen piece of lead. Blood flowed freely from the wound, and she quickly pressed clean cloth against it. "The worst is over," she said, though she knew that wasn't entirely true. There was still the infection to fight, and the fever that was consuming him. As she cleaned and sutured the wound, Eleanor became increasingly aware of his body beneath her hands. In her focus on saving his life, she'd managed to ignore the fact that she was touching a man, something she'd done as a healer many times, but never like this, never alone, in secret, with someone who wasn't just a patient, but a warrior, an enemy, a man whose culture was as foreign to her as the moon. His shirt was ruined, soaked with blood and sweat. She'd have to remove it to properly clean and dress all his wounds. Eleanor's hands hesitated at the ties. "Close your eyes," she whispered, heat rising in her cheeks. But the fever had made him lucid in a strange way. His dark eyes remained open, watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. There was no threat in his gaze, no impropriety, just a profound awareness, as if he was memorizing every detail of her face. Eleanor's fingers trembled as she worked the ties loose. She'd seen male bodies before in her work as a healer, but always in daylight, always with others present, always with the professional distance that propriety demanded. This felt different, intimate, dangerous. As she peeled away the blood-stiffened fabric, she tried to maintain that professional distance, cataloging injuries with a healer's eye, but she couldn't ignore the powerful build of his torso, the scars that told stories of previous battles, the way his chest rose and fell with labored breaths. She needed to clean him properly. The dried blood and dirt would only worsen the infection. Eleanor fetched water and clean cloths, acutely aware of his eyes following her every movement. "Please," she said again, her voice barely above a whisper. "Close your eyes. This isn't proper." A ghost of something, amusement, flickered across his features. When he spoke, his voice was hoarse but clear. And in English, "Nothing about this is proper." Eleanor nearly dropped the water basin. "You speak English?" "Mission school," he managed between shallow breaths. "Long ago." She didn't know what shocked her more, that he could speak her language or that he'd chosen this moment to reveal it. "Why didn't you say something before?" "You didn't ask." His eyes held that same intensity. "And I wanted to see." "See what?" "If you were what you appeared to be." He paused, gathering strength. "A healer. Nothing more." Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks again. "I am a healer, that's all." "No," he said softly. "You are unexpected." The word hung between them, loaded with meaning Eleanor didn't want to examine too closely. She focused on her work, wringing out a cloth in the cool water. "I need to clean these wounds properly," she said, trying to reclaim some semblance of professional authority. "It would be easier if you'd close your eyes." "Easier for who?" The question was barely audible, but it struck Eleanor like a physical blow, because he was right. It would be easier for her, not him. Easier to pretend this was just another medical procedure, that the man beneath her hands wasn't watching her with eyes that seemed to see straight through her carefully constructed walls. "For both of us," she said finally, "this situation is complicated enough." He studied her for a long moment, then slowly closed his eyes. But somehow, that made it worse. Now she could look at him freely, and what she saw made her hands shake even more, even wounded and fevered. There was a nobility to his features, a strength that went beyond the physical. Eleanor worked in silence, cleaning away blood and dirt with gentle strokes. His skin was hot with fever, and she could feel the tension in his muscles, the effort it took for him to remain still. Occasionally, a soft intake of breath told her when she'd hit a particularly sensitive spot. As she worked her way across his chest, her cloth caught on something, a leather cord around his neck. Hidden beneath the blood and grime, attached to it was a small turquoise stone, intricately carved. "Don't," he said sharply, his hand catching her wrist. His eyes were open again, alarmed. "I won't take it," Eleanor assured him. "I was just cleaning around it." He held her wrist a moment longer, and Eleanor became acutely aware of his touch, the calluses that spoke of weapons training, the surprising gentleness of his grip, the heat of his fever-warmed skin against hers. "It was my father's," he said finally, releasing her. "And his father's before him?" "It's beautiful." Eleanor carefully cleaned around the necklace. "What's your name?" He hesitated. Kale Yazzie." "I'm Eleanor Hayes." She dipped the cloth in the water again, watching it turn pink with blood. "How did you end up shot and left for dead?" "Cavalry patrol. We were negotiating. It went wrong." His voice was growing weaker. "They shot first. I was the only one to escape." Eleanor's hand stilled. "The others?" "Dead." The word was flat, emotionless, but she saw the pain flicker across his features. "My younger brother among them." "I'm sorry." The words felt inadequate, but she meant them. Kale's eyes found hers again. "Why do you help me? Your people would call you traitor." Eleanor considered the question as she wrung out the cloth. "Why indeed? Because you needed help. Because I could give it. Because—" She paused, searching for words. "Because I've seen too much death in this place. Senseless death. I couldn't add to it." "You risk much." "Yes." There was no point in denying it. "But that's my choice to make." She finished cleaning his chest and arms, then hesitated. His leather leggings were also blood-stained, and she could see at least one wound on his thigh that needed attention. "I need to—" She gestured helplessly. Kale's expression didn't change, but she saw understanding in his eyes. "You have seen the worst," he said quietly. Do what must be done. Eleanor's face burned, but she forced herself to maintain her professional demeanor. She'd treated wounded men before, she reminded herself. This was no different. Except it was entirely different. As she worked, cutting away the damaged leather, cleaning and bandaging the thigh wound, she was acutely aware of the intimacy of the situation. Not just the physical intimacy, though that was overwhelming enough, but something deeper. In his vulnerability, trusting her with his life, and in her determination to save him despite the risk. They'd crossed into territory that had nothing to do with Navajo or white, warrior or healer. They were simply two human beings in an impossible situation, bound now by secrets and unspoken understandings. When she finished, Eleanor covered him with clean blankets, leaving only his shoulders and head exposed. She checked his fever, still high, but perhaps not climbing anymore. You need willow bark tea, she said. I'll brew some and bring it before dawn. Cale caught her hand as she started to rise. Eleanor Hayes, he said, her name sounding foreign and musical in his accent. I am in your debt. No, she said firmly. There are no debts between patient and healer. Then what is between us? The question was soft, almost rhetorical, but it hung in the air like smoke. Eleanor didn't answer, couldn't answer, because she didn't know what to call this strange connection, this awareness that went beyond the circumstances that had brought them together. Instead, she gently freed her hand and gathered her supplies. Rest, I'll be back soon. As she reached the barn door, his voice stopped her. Eleanor. She turned. Thank you for seeing me as a man, not just as Navajo. Eleanor's throat tightened. Thank you for seeing me as a woman, not just as white. The words surprised her as much as they seemed to surprise him. She fled before either of them could say anything more, slipping back through the pre-dawn darkness to her shop. Inside, she leaned against the closed door, her heart racing. What was she doing? This went beyond healing, beyond mercy, the way he'd looked at her, the way she'd felt under his gaze. Eleanor shook her head firmly. He was her patient. She was his healer. That was all this could be, all she could allow it to be. Anything else was not just improper, but dangerous, for both of them. But as she set water to boil for the willow bark tea, Eleanor couldn't forget the weight of his eyes on her, the careful way he'd said her name, the question that neither of them could answer. What is between us? The first light of dawn was creeping across the desert, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Soon the town would wake, and Eleanor would have to pretend that nothing had changed, that she hadn't spent the night breaking every rule she'd ever known. But something had changed. In trying to save Cale Yazzy's life, Eleanor had opened a door that could never be fully closed again. And on the other side of that door lay possibilities as beautiful and dangerous as the desert itself. Asterisk, asterisk, Part 3. Fire in the night, asterisk, asterisk. 3 days passed in a blur of stolen moments and carefully orchestrated deceptions. Eleanor had developed a routine tend to her shop during the day, deflect questions about her tired appearance, and slip away to the barn whenever possible. The fever had broken on the second night, and Cale was recovering with a speed that surprised them both. You heal like a warrior, Eleanor said, changing his bandages by lantern light. It had become their time, these quiet hours when the town slept and they could speak freely. I had a good healer, Cale replied, his dark eyes following her movements. He was sitting up now, his back against the barn wall, though she'd forbidden him from trying to stand yet. Tell me about the mission school, Eleanor said, partly from curiosity, and partly to distract herself from how natural this had become, being here with him, talking as if they weren't from two different worlds. Cale's expression darkened. I was 8 when they took me, said they would civilize us, make us useful. He touched the turquoise at his throat. They tried to take this. I bit the teacher who grabbed for it. Eleanor winced as she secured the fresh bandage. What happened? They beat me, then they cut my hair. His hand went unconsciously to his long black hair, now clean and tied back. In my culture, hair is sacred. To cut it is a kind of death. But it grew back. Yes, but the boy who left that school was not the same one who entered. He paused, studying her face in the lamplight. They taught me your language, your writing, your ways. But they also taught me that your people would never see me as equal, no matter how well I learned. Eleanor felt shame heat her cheeks. Not all of us think that way. No, he agreed softly. Not all. She finished with the bandages and sat back on her heels. Over the past days, they'd talked more than Eleanor had talked with anyone since her father's death. She'd learned that Cale was a leader among his people, respected for his intelligence and fighting skills, that he'd spent years trying to negotiate peace, only to watch treaties broken and promises scattered like dust. Your turn, Cale said. Tell me about your father. Eleanor smiled sadly. He was a good man, too good for this place. Maybe he came out here after my mother died, dragging me along, said he wanted to help people, bring medicine to the frontier. She absently straightened her supplies. He never turned anyone away, Mexican, Chinese, even Apache once. The town didn't like it, but they needed him too much to do anything about it. And they need you now. They tolerate me, Eleanor corrected. There's a difference. Why do you stay? It was a question she'd asked herself countless times. Where would I go back east to be a proper lady? Marry some banker who'd expect me to forget everything I know about medicine. She shook her head. At least here, I'm useful. Useful, Cale repeated, as if tasting the word. Is that enough? Eleanor didn't answer because she didn't know. Was it enough? It had seemed so before, but now. A sound outside made them both freeze. Footsteps, coming closer. Eleanor blew out the lantern and pressed a finger to her lips. In the darkness, she felt Cale tense, ready to fight despite his injuries. The barn door creaked open. Miss Hayes, you in here? Eleanor's heart nearly stopped. It was Tom Morrison, the shopkeeper's son. What was he doing here at this hour? Tom, she stepped out from behind the stored crates, hoping the darkness would hide any sign of Cale. You startled me. I was just checking on the medical supplies I keep out here. Tom held up his own lantern, and Eleanor forced herself not to glance toward where Cale was hidden. Ma sent me. My sister's baby is coming early, and she's asking for you. Relief flooded through Eleanor. A legitimate emergency. Of course, let me get my bag. Why were you sitting in the dark? Tom asked, his lantern swinging in an arc that came dangerously close to Cale's position. I dropped my lantern. The oil spilled. The lie came easily. Too easily. Go on ahead. Tell your mother I'll be right there. Tom hesitated, and for a moment Eleanor thought he might insist on waiting. But then he nodded and left, taking his light with him. In the darkness, Eleanor heard Cale release a slow breath. That was close, she whispered. You should go, he said. The woman needs you. Eleanor fumbled for her medical bag. I'll be back as soon as I can. There's water and some food in the corner. Don't light the lantern. And don't. Eleanor. His hand caught hers in the darkness. I know. Be careful. The birth took 6 hours. The baby was small but healthy, and Eleanor stayed until she was sure both mother and child were stable. By the time she returned to her shop, dawn was breaking and the town was beginning to stir. She wanted nothing more than to check on Cale, but she forced herself to wait. Marshal Harlan and 2 deputies were drinking coffee outside the jail, and their eyes followed her as she unlocked her shop. Morning, Miss Hayes, Harlan called out. Heard you had a long night. The Morrison baby came early, Eleanor said, trying to keep her voice neutral. She'd never liked Harlan. There was something cruel in his pale eyes, something that reminded her of a snake. "Noble work." Harlan stood, adjusting his gun belt. "Say, you haven't seen anything unusual lately, have you? We're still looking for that Navajo warrior who escaped the canyon fight." Eleanor's pulse quickened, but she kept her expression calm. "No, Marshal, nothing unusual." Harlan studied her for a long moment. "Well, you let me know if you do. Man like that is dangerous. No telling what he might do to a woman alone." The threat in his words was subtle but clear. Eleanor forced a tight smile. "I'll be sure to let you know, Marshal." Inside her shop, Eleanor's hands shook as she prepared herbs for the morning's customers. Harlan suspected something, or maybe he was just fishing. Either way, she needed to be more careful. It was afternoon before she could slip away to the barn. She found Cale standing by the small window, watching the desert through a crack in the boards. "You shouldn't be up," she scolded, even as part of her admired the way he moved, fluid despite his injuries, every motion controlled and purposeful. "I've been still too long," he said, turning to face her. "My people will think I'm dead." Eleanor felt something cold settle in her stomach. Of course, he would leave as soon as he was able. What had she expected? "You're not healed enough to travel," she said, busying herself with checking his bandages to hide her expression. "Eleanor." He caught her hands, stilling them. "Look at me." She raised her eyes to his, unprepared for the intensity she found there. "I don't want to bring danger to you," he said. "Already you risk too much." "That's my choice," Eleanor said, echoing her words from that first night. "Is it?" Cale's hands were warm on hers. "The Marshal watches you now. Others will too. They'll wonder why you look tired, why you spend time in this barn. Let them wonder." "Eleanor." "No!" She pulled her hands free, anger flaring. "Don't you dare make this decision for me. I'm not some fragile Eastern lady who needs protecting. I've survived 3 years in this town alone. I can handle Marshal Harlan." Cale studied her, and she saw something shift in his expression, surprise giving way to respect, and something else, something that made her breath catch. "You are fierce," he said softly, "like a warrior." "I'm a healer," Eleanor corrected, but her voice had lost its edge. "Can you not be both?" The question hung between them. Eleanor thought of all the times she'd wanted to fight back against the narrow expectations of her world. All the times she'd bitten her tongue and played the role of the spinster medicine woman. "I don't know," she admitted. Cale moved closer, and Eleanor found herself unable to step back. "In my culture," he said, "the strongest warriors are those who know when to fight and when to heal. You saved my life when you could have let me die. That takes a courage greater than any battle." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. When was the last time anyone had seen her as strong rather than strange, as brave rather than foolish? "Cale," she began, but didn't know how to finish. He touched her face gently, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "I see you, Eleanor Hayes, not as white, not as woman only, but as you are." The barn was silent except for their breathing and the distant sounds of the town. Eleanor knew she should step back, should remember all the reasons this was dangerous and wrong. But she couldn't move, caught by his touch and his words and the way he looked at her. "What are we doing?" she whispered. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I know that when I leave here, and I must leave, I will carry you with me." He touched his chest, over his heart. "Here." Eleanor closed her eyes, leaning into his touch despite herself. This can't be anything more than what it is. 2 people who helped each other. Nothing more. "If that's true," Cale said softly, "then why does it feel like everything—" She opened her eyes and saw her own confusion and longing reflected in his, without conscious thought. She rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his, a kiss that was question and answer, ending and beginning all at once. Cale's arms came around her, gentle but sure, and Eleanor felt something inside her break free, some carefully constructed wall that had kept her safe, but also kept her alone. When they pulled apart, both were breathing hard. "I should go," Eleanor said, but made no move to leave his embrace. "Yes," Cale agreed, but his arms didn't loosen. They stood there, caught between should and want, between safety and whatever this dangerous thing was growing between them. Finally, Eleanor stepped back. "I'll bring food tonight, and we need to start planning how to get you back to your people safely." Cale nodded, but she saw in his eyes what she felt in her heart, that leaving would not be simple, that something had been started here that couldn't easily be ended. As she walked back to her shop, Eleanor felt changed in some fundamental way. The town looked the same. The people went about their business as always. But she saw it all differently now. She'd crossed a line with that kiss, admitted to feelings that had no future. But for the first time in 3 years, Eleanor felt truly alive. Whatever came next, danger, heartbreak, disaster, at least she would face it having known what it was to be seen, to be valued, to be wanted not for what she could do but for who she was. The fire had been lit, and Eleanor knew there would be no putting it out. Asterisk, asterisk, Part 4, The Spark of Conflict, asterisk, asterisk. Marshal Harlan's boot struck the wooden floor of the apothecary with deliberate force. Eleanor looked up from grinding herbs, her mortar and pestle stilling in her hands. He wasn't alone. 2 deputies flanked him, their hands resting casually on their gun belts. "Marshal," Eleanor said evenly, "how can I help you?" Harlan removed his hat, revealing thinning blonde hair slicked back with pomade. His pale eyes swept over her shop with the calculating gaze of a predator. "Just checking on our town's valuable citizens. Miss Hayes. Can't be too careful with savages on the loose." "I haven't seen any savages," Eleanor replied, resuming her grinding. "Only civilized men who sometimes act otherwise." The marshal's thin lips curved in what might have been a smile. "Sharp tongue for a lady. Your father never did teach you proper manners." "My father taught me to speak truthfully." "Truth." Harlan moved closer, and Eleanor caught the scent of tobacco and stale whiskey. "That's what I'm after. See, funny thing, we tracked that Navajo warrior to the old cottonwoods. Blood trail ended there. Man loses that much blood. He doesn't just vanish." Eleanor kept her movement steady, though her heart raced. "Desert's full of scavengers, coyotes, buzzards." "Maybe." Harlan picked up a bottle from her shelf, examining it with feigned interest. "Or maybe someone helped him, someone with medical knowledge, someone who's been looking mighty tired lately. I delivered the Morrison baby 3 nights ago," Eleanor said. "I suspect every woman in town would look tired after that." "True enough." He set the bottle down harder than necessary. "Still, I'd hate to think someone in our town would betray their own kind. Help a murdering savage who killed good Christian soldiers." Eleanor's hands tightened on the pestle. "From what I heard, those soldiers shot first during a peace negotiation." The shop fell silent. One of the deputies shifted nervously. Harlan's eyes narrowed. "Where'd you hear that?" Eleanor silently cursed her temper. "Soldiers talk when they're injured. I've treated enough of them." "Have you now?" Harlan moved even closer. Close enough that Eleanor had to fight the urge to step back. "You know, Miss Hayes, this town tolerates your peculiarities because you're useful, but usefulness only goes so far." "Is that a threat? Marshal?" "It's advice." His gaze traveled over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "A woman alone needs protection. I could provide that. Make sure no one questions your activities." Eleanor met his gaze steadily. "I don't need protection. Marshal, I need customers who pay their bills. Speaking of which, you still owe me for those headache powders." Color rose in Harlan's face. Behind him, one deputy coughed to hide a laugh. "You do well to remember who keeps order in this town." Harlan said coldly. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Oh, and Miss Hayes, I'll be watching very closely." After they left, Eleanor's knees nearly buckled. She gripped the counter, breathing hard. Harlan knew something, or at least suspected, and worse, he'd shown his other interest, the kind that had nothing to do with law and order. She waited until well after dark before going to the barn. Cale was immediately alert when she entered, reading the tension in her movements. What happened? Eleanor told him about Harlan's visit, watching his expression darken with each word. "I should leave tonight," Cale said when she finished. "I've brought you enough danger. You can barely walk a straight line." Eleanor protested. "Your shoulder. We'll heal on the journey." He stood, and though he tried to hide it, Eleanor saw him wince. "Better I die in the desert than bring harm to you." "Stop." Eleanor moved to block his path. "Just stop. You don't get to make all the decisions here." "Eleanor." "No, listen to me." She planted her hands on his chest, feeling his heartbeat beneath her palms. "Harlan's been circling me like a vulture since my father died. This isn't just about you. It's about him wanting to own everything in this town, including me." Cale's hands covered hers. "More reason for me to go. If he sees me as competition." "He already does, whether you're here or not." Eleanor looked up at him, seeing her own fears reflected in his eyes. "Don't you understand? The moment I saved you, I chose a side. There's no going back now." They stood there, her hands trapped between his and his chest, the air between them charged with more than fear. "I would kill him for you," Cale said quietly. "For how he looked at you, spoke to you." "I know." Eleanor's voice was equally soft. "That's why you can't. You defend your enemy." "No, I protect you from becoming what they already think you are." She pulled one hand free to touch his face. "You're not a savage. Cale, don't let them make you into one." He turned his face into her palm, pressing a kiss there that sent heat through her entire body. "You make me want to be better than I am. You already are." The barn door creaked, and they sprang apart. Eleanor's hand went to the pistol she'd started carrying, but it was only the wind. Still, it reminded them both of their precarious situation. "We need a plan," Eleanor said, trying to steady her breathing. "You need at least 3 more days before you can travel. We have to be smarter." Cale nodded slowly. "In 3 days, the moon will be new. Darkness will help. I'll start gathering supplies carefully. Nothing that will be noticed." Eleanor paced, thinking. "There's an old mining trail north of here, abandoned for years. It connects to the canyonlands where your people might be." "You know this trail?" "My father and I traveled it once, visiting a mining camp. It's rough, but passable." She paused. "I'll need to come with you part of the way, to make sure—" "No." The word was sharp, final. "You've risked enough." "It's not your decision, Eleanor." He caught her shoulders, forcing her to meet his eyes. "If they catch you helping me escape, they'll hang you, or worse." "And if you collapse 2 miles into the desert, if your wound reopens—" She shook her head. "I'm a healer. I finish what I start." They glared at each other, wills clashing. "Finally." Cale sighed. "You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met." "And you're the most difficult patient." But Eleanor smiled as she said it. "We'll go as far as Skeleton Ridge. From there, you can make it alone. And you, how will you return without suspicion?" Eleanor had been thinking about that. "I'll leave signs of a struggle. Say I was taken against my will. Escaped when you were distracted." Her face heated at the implication. Something flashed in Cale's eyes. Hurt, maybe, or understanding. "They'll believe that easily enough. White woman captured by savage Indian." "Don't." Eleanor touched his arm. "We both know it's not true. That's what matters. Is it? Cale pulled away, moving to the window. Sometimes I think it would be easier if it were true. If I were the monster they paint me as, then I wouldn't. He stopped. Wouldn't what? He turned back to her, and the raw emotion in his face took her breath away. Wouldn't want things I can never have. Wouldn't dream of a different world where a Navajo warrior and a white healer could. Could what? Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper. Could have more than 3 days. The words hung between them like a physical presence. Eleanor felt tears sting her eyes because he'd voiced what she'd been trying not to think. 3 days. That's all they had. Then we make them count, she said finally. Cale crossed to her in 2 strides, cupping her face in his hands. Eleanor Hayes, you have undone me. Good, she whispered, and pulled his head down to hers. This kiss was different from their first, desperate, knowing, tinged with the sorrow of endings before they'd had a chance to begin. Eleanor poured everything into it. Her fear, her longing, her anger at a world that made their connection impossible. When they broke apart, both were shaking. 3 days, Cale said against her forehead. 3 days. Eleanor agreed. She left him then, slipping back through the darkness to her lonely room above the shop. But sleep wouldn't come. Instead, she lay staring at the ceiling, planning and worrying and trying not to think about how empty her life would be when he was gone. Outside, she heard boots on the walkway and peered through her curtain. Harlan stood across the street, a cigarette glowing in the darkness, watching, waiting. Eleanor let the curtain fall and checked her father's pistol. 3 days to keep Cale hidden. 3 days to prepare for an escape that could cost her everything. 3 days to store up enough memories to last a lifetime. She pressed her fingers to her lips, still feeling his kiss, and made herself a promise. Whatever came after, she would have no regrets. She would live these 3 days fully, honestly, bravely. Like a warrior, she thought, and almost smiled. In the barn, Cale stood watch at the window, seeing the same cigarette glow Eleanor had noticed. His hand moved instinctively to where his knife should be, finding only empty air. 3 days. He would heal enough in 3 days. Leave this place and the woman who'd saved more than his life. He would return to his people, to the fight that never ended, to the destiny written for him since birth. But for 3 days, he would allow himself to imagine another life. One where love could bridge the divide between peoples. One where a warrior could lay down his weapons and a healer could heal more than bodies. 3 days to live a lifetime of possibilities. The cigarette glow moved away, but Cale kept watching. Somewhere in the darkness, danger circled like a patient predator. But for now, for these stolen moments, he would stand guard over the only thing in this hostile land worth protecting. His fierce healer, his unexpected salvation, his Eleanor. Asterisk, asterisk, Part 5, Night of Fire and Flesh, asterisk, asterisk. The storm came without warning on their second night, rolling across the desert like an angry god. Thunder shook the barn walls while rain hammered the roof in sheets. Eleanor had been preparing to leave when the sky opened up, trapping her there with Cale. "You can't go out in this," he said, watching her hover near the door. Lightning illuminated his face in stark flashes. Even Harlan wouldn't be watching in this weather. Eleanor knew he was right, but being here, alone with him as the storm raged, felt dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with discovery. She'd been so careful the past 2 days, keeping physical distance even as their emotional connection deepened. But the storm had created a bubble outside of time, a space where normal rules seemed suspended. "I have blankets in the corner," she said, trying to sound practical. "We should stay warm." They spread the blankets near the old cast-iron stove that hadn't been lit in years. Eleanor had brought oil for the lantern, but matches too. Soon, a small fire crackled to life, casting dancing shadows on the walls. "In my culture," Cale said, watching the flames, "fire is sacred." It connects us to the holy people, to the beginning of all things. Tell me, Eleanor said softly. She'd discovered she could listen to him for hours, his voice painting pictures of a world she'd never known. They say first man and first woman were created in the first world. Far beneath this one, they climbed through different worlds to reach here, and in each world, they learned something new. Fire was one of the first gifts. Warmth, light, protection, and destruction, Eleanor added, thinking of all the burned homesteads she'd treated victims from. Yes, like all sacred things, it can create or destroy. The choice is in how we use it. Lightning flashed again, followed immediately by thunder that rattled the boards. Eleanor jumped, and without thinking, moved closer to Cale. "Are you afraid of storms?" he asked, and she heard gentle teasing in his voice. "No, maybe. They remind me of the night my mother died." She rarely spoke of it, but something about the darkness and his presence made the words come easier. There was a terrible storm. She was already sick, but the thunder, she said it sounded like the world ending. Cale's arm came around her, natural as breathing. "My grandmother believed thunder was the voice of the Thunder people, bringing renewal. Perhaps your mother heard them calling her to the next world." Eleanor leaned into his warmth. "That's actually comforting." They sat in silence, watching the fire and listening to the storm. Eleanor was acutely aware of every point where their bodies touched, his arm around her shoulders, her head fitting perfectly into the curve of his neck, the solid warmth of him against her side. "This is dangerous," she murmured, not sure if she meant the storm, their situation, or this moment. "Yes," Cale agreed, but his arm tightened around her. "We should." Eleanor lost her words as his free hand found hers, fingers interlacing. "Should what?" His voice was rough. "Be wise. Be careful, follow rules made by people who would see us both dead before they'd see us together." Eleanor turned to face him, finding his eyes already on her. In the firelight, shadows and light played across his features, making him look like something out of legend, dangerous and beautiful and utterly beyond her reach. Except he wasn't beyond her reach. He was here, solid and real, looking at her like she was everything. "Cale," she breathed, not knowing if it was warning or invitation. He brought their joined hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to each of her knuckles. "I know, we shouldn't." "No," Eleanor agreed. "We shouldn't." But neither of them moved away. The fire popped, sending sparks up the old chimney. Outside, the storm seemed to intensify, cutting them off from the world even more completely. "Do you know what you've done to me?" Cale asked, his voice barely audible over the rain. "I was prepared to die when those soldiers shot us down, when I crawled away bleeding. I was ready to join my brother in the spirit world. Then you appeared like some kind of vision, and you gave me back my life. But more than that." "What?" Eleanor whispered. "You gave me a reason to want it." The words broke something in Eleanor. She turned fully into his arms, her hands coming up to frame his face. "Don't say things like that, not when you're leaving tomorrow." "Should I lie instead?" "Yes," she said fiercely. "Tell me this means nothing. Tell me you'll forget me the moment you're gone. Tell me—" He silenced her with a kiss that was nothing like their previous ones. This was fire and desperation, need and sorrow all tangled together. Eleanor responded with equal fervor, pouring all her fear and longing into the connection. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. "I can't lie to you," Cale said against her lips. "I've never lied to you." Eleanor made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "I know, that's the worst part." They came together again, and this time there was no hesitation. Eleanor's hands tangled in his hair, pulling it free from its tie. His hands spanned her waist, pulling her closer until there was no space between them. The rational part of Eleanor's mind, The part that had kept her safe and respectable for 24 years screamed warnings. But that voice was drowned out by the storm, by the fire, by the feeling of being truly alive for the first time. "Eleanor," Cale breathed her name like a prayer. "Tell me to stop." She pulled back to look at him. His eyes were dark with desire, but also something deeper: respect, care, the willingness to step back if she asked. "I don't want you to stop," she admitted. "God help me. I know what this means, what I'm risking, but I don't want you to stop." Something shifted in his expression, wonder, perhaps, or reverence. "You honor me," he said softly. And somehow that formal phrase was more intimate than any flowery declaration. They came together slowly this time, savoring each touch, each discovery. Eleanor had tended enough married women to know the basics of what happened between men and women. But nothing had prepared her for this, the overwhelming need to be closer, to know and be known completely. Clothes were shed with trembling hands, each revelation met with appreciation and desire. Eleanor felt no shame, only a sense of rightness as they lay down together on the blankets, skin to skin, heart to heart. "Are you certain?" Cale asked one last time, his control visible in the tension of his body. Eleanor answered by pulling him down for another kiss. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." What followed was a dance as old as time, yet utterly new to both of them. There was fumbling and laughter, tenderness and passion, moments of awkwardness overcome by patience and care. The fire painted their bodies in gold and shadow as they learned each other, claimed each other, gave themselves completely to this one perfect night. Afterward, they lay entwined. Eleanor's head on Cale's chest, listening to his heartbeat slowly return to normal. The storm had passed, leaving only gentle rain pattering on the roof. "Are you well?" Cale asked, his hand stroking her hair. Eleanor smiled against his skin. "More than well." "No regrets." She rose up on one elbow to look at him. "Never. Whatever comes tomorrow, or next week, or next year, I'll never regret this." Cale pulled her down for a gentle kiss. "Nor will I." They lay in silence for a while, both aware that dawn would come too soon. Finally, Eleanor spoke. "Tell me about your brother." Cale's arm tightened around her. "His name was Tahoma, 3 years younger, always trying to prove himself. He believed in peace, believed we could find a way to coexist with your people." His voice roughened. "He was the one who convinced me to attend that negotiation." "It wasn't your fault," Eleanor said firmly. "I was supposed to protect him." "You can't protect everyone from the world's cruelty." Eleanor traced patterns on his chest. "Believe me, I know. I watched my father try to save everyone who came to him, and in the end, I couldn't even save him. But you saved me." "We saved each other," Eleanor corrected. They talked through the night, sharing stories and secrets, dreams and fears. As the fire died to embers, they made love again. Slower this time, memorizing each touch against the coming separation. When the first pale light of dawn crept through the cracks in the barn walls, Eleanor knew their time was ending. Tonight, under cover of the new moon, Cale would leave. This stolen night was all they would have. "I need to go," she said reluctantly, reaching for her scattered clothes. Cale watched her dress with an expression that made her hands shake. "Eleanor." "Don't," she said softly. "Please, if you say what I think you're going to say, I won't be able to let you go, and you have to go." He nodded, understanding and pain clear in his eyes. Instead of words, he rose and helped her with the buttons she couldn't reach, his fingers lingering against her skin. At the barn door, Eleanor turned back. Cale stood naked and proud in the growing light, looking like some ancient warrior god. The sight of him stole her breath. "Tonight," she said, "be ready." "I will be." Eleanor slipped out into the dawn. every step away from him feeling like a small death. Her body ached in unfamiliar ways, pleasant reminders of the night's activities. Anyone who looked at her would know. She was certain. Surely such a profound change must show on her face. But the town was still sleeping, and Eleanor made it to her room unseen. She washed and changed, trying to armor herself in normalcy. In 12 hours, Cale would be gone. She would return to her life, her duties, her careful existence. Except she wouldn't. She couldn't. The woman who had entered that barn last night no longer existed. In her place stood someone new, someone who'd touched fire and been transformed by it. Eleanor pressed a hand to her heart, feeling it beat steady and strong. Whatever came next, she would face it as Cale saw her, as a warrior. And warriors, she'd learned, carried their scars and their joys with equal pride. The fire had burned through the night, and though the ashes remained, the warmth would stay with her forever. Asterisk, asterisk, Part 6, Blood on the Desert. Asterisk, asterisk. The new moon rose invisible in the darkness as Eleanor made her final preparations. She'd spent the day maintaining an elaborate charade of normalcy, tending customers, mixing medicines, even accepting an invitation to tea from the minister's wife. All the while, her mind raced through escape plans and her body hummed with awareness of the night before. She'd just finished packing medical supplies when boots thundered up her shop steps. The door burst open without a knock. Marshal Harlan stood there with 6 armed men, their faces hard with purpose. Going somewhere. Miss Hayes. Harlan's pale eyes took in her packed bag. Eleanor's heart hammered, but she kept her voice steady. Mrs. Garrett is due to deliver. I was preparing supplies. At this hour, Harlan stepped inside, his men spreading out behind him. Funny thing, we just got word from an Apache scout. Says he saw a Navajo warrior hiding in these parts. Says someone's been caring for him. Apache and Navajo are enemies, Eleanor said. Why would you trust? Because we pay him well. Harlan moved closer. Now, you wouldn't know anything about this warrior, would you? Before Eleanor could answer, young Tom Morrison pushed through the deputies. His face was flushed with excitement and something else, guilt. I saw her, he blurted out. 3 nights back, in the barn. She had a lantern but put it out when I came close. Eleanor felt the world tilt. Tom, whom she'd helped bring into this world, whose sister's baby she'd just delivered. Tom, she said quietly, you don't know what you're saying. He does, Harlan said with satisfaction. And for the reward money, he's saying it loud and clear. Search the barn, boys. Eleanor lunged for her father's pistol, but Harlan was faster. He backhanded her across the face, sending her sprawling. Stars burst across her vision. None of that now, Harlan said, taking her gun. You're going to show us where he is, nice and peaceful, or things get unpleasant. Eleanor tasted blood from her split lip. I don't know what you're talking about. Have it your way. Harlan nodded to his men. Tear this place apart, and bring me a torch for the barn. No. The word tore from Eleanor's throat before she could stop it. Harlan smiled. So, he is in the barn. Boys. They dragged her with them, Eleanor fighting every step. As they approached the barn, she saw Cale's silhouette in the doorway. He'd heard them coming. Cale, run! She screamed. But he didn't run. He stepped out with his hands visible, moving with that fluid grace despite his still healing wounds. In the torchlight, he looked magnificent and doomed. Let her go, Cale said calmly. Your business is with me. Actually, Harlan said, pushing Eleanor forward so she stumbled. My business is with both of you. Take him. The deputies rushed forward. Cale moved like water, dropping 2 men before the others overwhelmed him. They beat him to his knees, rifle butts finding his wounded shoulder. Eleanor cried out, struggling against Harlan's grip. Touching, Harlan sneered. The savage and his white woman. I'm not his anything, Eleanor said desperately. He took me hostage, forced me to treat him. Liar. Harlan's breath was hot against her ear. Tom saw plenty before tonight. Saw you going to him willing. Saw you touching him gentle-like. His grip tightened painfully. Wonder what else you did with him. Cale raised his head, blood streaming from a cut above his eye. She tells the truth. I threatened her, made her help me. She means nothing. His words cut off as a deputy kicked him in the ribs. Eleanor fought harder, earning another blow from Harlan that sent her to her knees beside Cale. Please, she gasped. He's hurt. Let me. I'll let you attend your savage lover. Harlan hauled her up by her hair. You've forgotten what you are. Miss Hayes. Forgotten your place. But don't worry. We'll remind you. A shot rang out. Everyone froze. William Bennett stood at the edge of the circle, his old Sharps rifle smoking. The elderly shopkeeper rarely spoke, rarely involved himself in town politics. But now his weathered face was set with determination. Let them be, Harlan, Bennett said. This has gone far enough. You defending an Indian lover, old man. I'm defending the woman who saved my wife when the cholera came through, who sat with my boy when he was dying. Never asked for payment. Bennett's rifle never wavered. This ain't right, and you know it. What I know, Harlan said slowly, is that you're interfering with the law. You ain't the law. You're just a man with a gun and a grudge. Bennett glanced at Eleanor. Get up, girl. Take your patient and go. For a moment, hope flared in Eleanor's chest. Then Harlan drew his pistol and shot Bennett in the chest. The old man crumpled. His wife's scream echoed from their shop doorway. The sound seemed to release something in the watching townspeople who'd been drawn by the commotion. Murmurs of shock and anger rippled through the crowd. Anyone else want to defend the savage? Harlan asked, his gun still smoking. No one moved. Eleanor stared at Bennett's still form, remembering his kindness, his quiet dignity, another life lost to this madness. String him up, Harlan ordered, gesturing to Cale. Let's show everyone what happens to Indians who touch white women. No, Eleanor threw herself forward, but rough hands caught her. We didn't please. They dragged Cale toward the big cottonwood at the town's edge, the hanging tree that had seen too much death already. Eleanor fought like a wild thing, earning curses and more blows, but they held her fast. You'll watch, Harlan said conversationally. Watch what your choices brought, then we'll decide what to do with you. The rope was already in place, always ready in this hard land. They hoisted Cale onto a horse beneath it, his hands bound behind him. Even now, beaten and bloodied, he held himself with dignity. Any last words? Savage, Harlan mocked. Cale's eyes found Eleanor through the crowd. She is not to blame, he said clearly. I forced her, threatened her. She is innocent of... Liar, Eleanor screamed, finally breaking free. She ran toward him but was tackled by a deputy before she could reach the horse. I love him. You hear me? I love him. And I won't let you... The shot came from the darkness beyond the torches. Then another and another. Deputies fell, crying out. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions. The crowd scattered, screaming. In the chaos, Eleanor saw riders materializing from the night, Navajo warriors, come for their own. The battle was brief but vicious. Harlan's men, caught off guard, fell back in disarray. Eleanor crawled through the dirt toward Cale's horse, which was dancing nervously as bullets flew. A figure dropped from the darkness, a young Navajo warrior who looked enough like Cale to be a cousin. He cut Cale's bonds with a swift motion. Niall, Cale said in shock. How? The Apache scout, the warrior said in accented English. He plays both sides, told us they had you. He glanced at Eleanor. this the woman? Yes, we take her. No. Eleanor grabbed Cale's leg as he swung up behind his cousin. You have to go, now, before… More shots. Harlan emerged from behind a water trough, his face twisted with rage. His gun swung toward them. Eleanor didn't think. She threw herself between them as he fired. The impact spun her around. She hit the ground hard. Fire blooming across her side. Through the roar in her ears, she heard Cale scream her name. Go! She gasped, pressing her hand to the wound. Blood seeped between her fingers. Please, go! Cale slid from the horse, catching her as she swayed. Eleanor, beautiful fool, she whispered, touching his face with her bloody hand. This was always how it would end. Go, live, for both of us. I won't leave you. You will. She found strength from somewhere, pushing at him. Because if you stay, they'll kill you. And then this was all for nothing. Go. More riders were coming, cavalry from the fort, drawn by the gunfire. The Navajo warriors were already melting back into the darkness. Hands pulled at Cale, his cousin shouting urgently. I'll come back, Cale said fiercely, pressing something into her hand. His turquoise necklace. I swear it. Stay alive. Beloved. Stay alive for me. Then he was gone, swept away into the night. Eleanor lay in the dust, one hand pressed to her wound, the other clutching his necklace. Around her, the town erupted in chaos. Soldiers pursuing, women screaming, men shouting orders. Through it all, Eleanor stared at the stars and smiled. He was free. Whatever happened to her now, Cale was free. Got you now, Harlan snarled, appearing above her. His gun pointed at her head, Indian-loving. Marshal Harlan, the voice cracked like a whip. Colonel Marcus Webb of Fort Defiance stepped into the torchlight, his uniform immaculate despite the chaos. Lower your weapon? Colonel, this woman aided a savage. She… I said lower your weapon. The colonel's voice brooked no argument. I'll not have you murdering women in the street, whatever their crimes. Reluctantly, Harlan holstered his gun. She's a traitor. That's for a court to decide. The colonel knelt beside Eleanor, his face grave, though from the look of this wound, she may not live to see trial. Get me the surgeon, now. Eleanor felt consciousness slipping away as hands lifted her. The last thing she saw was the stars, brilliant in the desert sky. And the last thing she felt was the smooth turquoise against her palm. He was free. She had given him that, at least, and if these were her last moments, she would not waste them on regret. The blood-soaked desert had claimed its price, but love, fierce, impossible love, had won its own victory in the darkness. Asterisk, asterisk, Part 7, The Path to Freedom, asterisk, asterisk. Eleanor woke to pain and the smell of carbolic acid. The fort's infirmary was a far cry from her cozy rooms above the apothecary, all harsh angles and military efficiency. Through the window, she could see soldiers drilling in the dusty parade ground. Ah, the patient awakens. Dr. Marcus Thornley, the fort surgeon, appeared at her bedside. He was a competent man, if cold, with gray mutton chops that made him look older than his 40 years. You're quite fortunate, Miss Hayes. The bullet passed through cleanly. Another inch to the left. How long? Eleanor's voice came out as a croak. 3 days. You've been in and out of consciousness. He poured water, helping her drink. The colonel has questions when you're able. 3 days. Cale would be far away by now. Safe with his people. The thought brought both relief and an ache deeper than her physical wound. Am I under arrest? That remains to be seen. Doctor, Thornley's expression was carefully neutral. Your actions have divided the town. Some call for your hanging. Others… He paused. William Bennett's death has made some reconsider Marshal Harlan's methods. Eleanor closed her eyes, remembering the old shopkeeper's kindness. Another good man dead because of hatred and fear. I need to speak with the colonel, she said. An hour later, Colonel Webb entered, his bearing military straight but his eyes unexpectedly kind. He was younger than Eleanor had first thought, perhaps 35, with premature silver at his temples. "Miss Hayes," he said, pulling up a chair. "I've been waiting to hear your version of events." Eleanor had had 3 days to think about this moment. She could lie, claim she'd been forced, play the victim. It might save her life. But she thought of Cale's courage, of Bennett's sacrifice, of her father's integrity. "I found him wounded and dying," she said simply. "I chose to help him, not because he was Navajo or despite it, but because he was a human being who needed care. And your relationship with him." Heat rose in Eleanor's cheeks, but she met his gaze steadily. "I came to know him as a man of honor and intelligence. Whatever feelings developed were mutual and—" She searched for words that wouldn't shock. "Respectful." The colonel studied her for a long moment. "You realize what you're admitting could see you hanged." "I realize, but I won't dishonor what happened with lies." Webb stood, pacing to the window. "I've been investigating the events at Devil's Canyon, the supposed negotiation where this Cale Yazzy's brother was killed. It seems Marshal Harlan's report was incomplete." Eleanor's heart quickened. "What do you mean?" "I mean that witnesses among my own men say the Navajo came in peace, that Harlan's deputies opened fire without provocation." He turned back to her. "I believe Harlan has been deliberately provoking conflicts to justify his own agenda, which includes seizing Navajo lands that happen to lie along proposed railway routes." The pieces clicked into place. "He's been starting a war for profit." "It appears so, and now he's overplayed his hand, shooting William Bennett, attempting to lynch a wounded prisoner without trial, endangering women." Webb shook his head. "The territorial governor is not pleased." "So what happens now?" "Now, Miss Hayes, I offer you a choice." The colonel resumed his seat. "Testify about what you know of Harlan's activities. Help me build a case against him, and I'll see you safely away from here. Refuse, and I'll have to turn you over to local authorities for trial." It wasn't really a choice. Eleanor nodded. "I'll testify." Over the next week, as Eleanor recovered, she told her story repeatedly, to the colonel, to a territorial judge, to a special investigator sent from Washington. Harlan raged and threatened, but he was confined to the fort jail, his deputites stripped of authority. The town remained divided. Some saw Eleanor as a traitor, others as a victim, still others as a hero who'd exposed corruption. She couldn't return to her shop. Someone had burned it the night after the shooting, so she remained at the fort, in limbo. On the 8th night, she woke to a presence in her room. Her hand went to the turquoise necklace she kept under her pillow, and she knew. "Cale," she whispered into the darkness. He materialized from the shadows, and Eleanor's heart nearly stopped. He looked thinner, travel-worn, but whole, alive. "You shouldn't be here," she said even as she reached for him. "It's dangerous." He caught her hands, pressing them to his lips. "I gave you my word. I came back." "Cale." "Listen." He sat carefully on the edge of her bed, mindful of her injury. "My people have moved north, to lands the soldiers don't patrol. There's a valley, hidden, with water and game, safe." Eleanor's throat tightened. "That sounds wonderful. For you." "For us." His hands tightened on hers. "Come with me, Eleanor." The word she'd dreamed of and dreaded. "Cale, I can't just—" "Why?" His voice was fierce. "Your shop is gone. Half the town wants you dead. What keeps you here? And your people, they'll welcome a white woman who brings danger. You saved my life. You bled for my freedom. He touched the bandages at her side gently. They will see you as I do, a woman of courage who chose love over safety. Eleanor felt tears sliding down her cheeks. It's not that simple. It is exactly that simple. Cale wiped her tears with his thumbs. You taught me that. When you found me dying, you didn't see complications. You saw a life to save. Now I see a life to share. My life with you. I don't know anything about your world. You'll learn, as I learned yours. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. You're the most stubborn woman I know, and the bravest. You'll adapt. Eleanor laughed through her tears, then winced as it pulled at her wound. You make it sound so easy. Not easy. Nothing about this has been easy. His expression grew serious. But possible, if we're together. She studied his face in the dim light, this warrior who'd changed everything. He was right. What did she have here now? Ashes and accusations. And what did he offer? Unknown challenges? Certainly, but also love, partnership, a chance at a life lived honestly. The colonel is sending me to California, she said slowly, to testify at Harlan's federal trial. After that, I'm free to go where I please. California is on the way north, Cale said. I could meet you after, when it's safe. Eleanor made her decision. No. His face fell, and she quickly continued. If we do this, we do it together. No more separations, no more hiding. She freed one hand to touch his face. I'll go to California. Testify. Make sure Harlan can never hurt anyone again. Then I'll meet you, but you'll travel with me, as my husband. Cale's breath caught. Eleanor. Not in their way. In yours. Whatever ceremonies your people require. But I won't go to your family as anything less than your wife. She managed a watery smile. I've scandalized one society, might as well be respectable in another. He kissed her then, careful of her injuries but thorough in his joy. When they parted, both were breathless. My fierce healer, he murmured. Yes, yes to all of it. They talked through the night, making plans. Cale knew traders who could arrange new identities, papers that would let them travel together without questions. After the trial, they would disappear into the vast territories where a mixed couple could find anonymity. It won't be easy, Eleanor warned. There will always be those who hate what we are. Let them hate, Cale said simply. We'll have each other. As dawn approached, he prepared to leave. 2 months, he said. I'll wait at Bent's trading post, north of the fort. I'll be there. He kissed her once more, then paused at the window. Eleanor, that night in the barn, when you told me to close my eyes. Yes. I'm glad I didn't. Then he was gone, leaving Eleanor alone with her tumultuous thoughts and the sunrise painting the desert in shades of gold. 6 weeks later, she sat in a San Francisco courthouse, calmly detailing Marshal Harlan's crimes. He glared at her from the defendant's table, but his power was broken. The federal prosecutor had built an ironclad case of corruption, attempted murder, and inciting racial violence. When Eleanor stepped down from the witness stand, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Her part was done. Justice, imperfect but real, had been served. She left the courthouse by a side door and never looked back. A month later, a woman in traveling clothes arrived at Bent's trading post. Her hair was shorter, darker, and she wore spectacles that changed the shape of her face. The papers identified her as Mrs. Catherine Yazzie, headed north to join her husband's family. Cale waited in the stable, dressed like a Mexican vaquero. When he saw her, his face lit with a joy that made Eleanor's heart sing. Ready? He asked. Catherine now took his offered hand. Ready! They rode out together as the sun set, heading toward mountains that promised shelter and a new life. It would be hard. Eleanor knew there would be challenges she couldn't imagine, adjustments on both sides. danger still to face. But as Cale began teaching her words in his language, as the stars emerged in the vast desert sky, as her body remembered the rhythm of riding beside him, Eleanor felt something she hadn't experienced in years. She felt free. The path ahead was uncertain, but it was theirs to walk together. And that, she thought as she touched the turquoise at her throat, made all the difference. Behind them, the world they'd known grew smaller with each mile. Ahead, the future waited, unknown but no longer feared. They rode toward it together, two people who'd found love in impossible circumstances and chose to bet everything on its power to sustain them. The desert wind carried away their past names, their old lives, their separate destinies. What remained was simpler and infinitely more complex. Two hearts beating as one, heading home. Asterisk, asterisk, portrayed. Truth and promise, asterisk, asterisk. The hidden valley lay like a jewel in the harsh landscape, protected by canyon walls and fed by a spring that never ran dry. Eleanor Catherine now stood at the edge of the Navajo settlement, watching the sun paint the rocks in shades of copper and gold. 3 months had passed since she joined Cale's people. 3 months of adjustment, learning, and unexpected joy. Still watching the sunrise, Cale's arms encircled her from behind, his warmth welcome in the cool morning air. "It's different here," Eleanor said, leaning into him. "Bigger somehow. Or maybe I'm just seeing it clearly for the first time." The sound of approaching horses made them both turn. A small party was riding in, and Eleanor recognized the lead rider, Niall, Cale's cousin, who'd helped rescue him that terrible night. But Niall's face was grim as he dismounted. "We have a problem," he said without preamble. "Harlan escaped." Eleanor's blood ran cold. "What, how?" "Killed 2 guards during a transfer. He's gathered what's left of his men." Niall's dark eyes were sympathetic but urgent. "He's coming this way. Says he has unfinished business." Cale's arms tightened around Eleanor. "How many?" 8, maybe 10 men, well armed." Niall glanced at Eleanor. "He's been asking about a woman with medical knowledge traveling with Navajo, offering gold for information." Eleanor felt the fragile peace of the past months crumbling. "I've brought danger to your people. I should—" "No." Cale turned her to face him. "We've discussed this. You are one of us now. We protect our own." The elderly clan mother, Maria Bigay, approached. She'd been the hardest to win over, suspicious of any white influence, but she'd watched Eleanor work tirelessly to learn their ways, to help with healing, to respect their customs. "The council will meet," Maria said in accented English, her weathered face unreadable. "We must decide." The debate that followed was heated. Some wanted to flee deeper into the canyons. Others advocated fighting. A few suggested that Eleanor leave to draw Harlan away. Eleanor stood when that was proposed. "I won't run anymore," she said in carefully practiced Navajo. "And I won't let others die for me. If Harlan wants me, let him come." "You would face him?" Maria asked, studying her intently. "I've been running or hiding my whole life," Eleanor replied, switching back to English so everyone could understand. "From expectations, from judgment, from myself. No more." She touched the turquoise at her throat. "This is my home now. These are my people. I'll defend both." A murmur ran through the gathering. Maria's eyes showed something that might have been approval. "Then we make our stand," Cale said, his voice carrying the authority of a war leader. "But on our terms, on ground we choose." They had 2 days to prepare. The narrow canyon entrance could be defended, but Harlan might try to starve them out. They needed a better plan. "He wants me," Eleanor said that night as she and Cale lay together in their simple dwelling. "Maybe I can use that." "Eleanor, no." "Listen." She propped herself on an elbow. "What if he thinks he's won? What if I appear to surrender, draw him into the open?" Cale's face was stone. Absolutely not. You have a better idea. They argued through the night, but eventually a plan emerged. Dangerous, requiring precise timing, but possible. The next morning, Eleanor rode out alone. She found Harlan's camp 5 miles from the valley, his men nervous and trigger-happy in hostile territory. When she appeared, they nearly shot her before Harlan's shout stopped them. "Well, well." Harlan emerged from his tent, looking worse for his time in prison. His face was gaunt, his pale eyes burning with fanatic hatred. The traitor comes crawling back. "I'm tired of running," Eleanor said, keeping her voice steady. "You win. Just leave the Navajo alone. Your quarrel is with me." Harlan laughed. An ugly sound. "Oh, I'll deal with you. But those savages are going to pay for humiliating me. Starting with your buck." Eleanor forced herself not to react. "Then you'll have to find them first. They've moved on, scattered. I can't help you there." "Can't or won't." Harlan moved closer, and Eleanor saw madness dancing in his eyes. "Doesn't matter. We'll burn every village until we find them." "That could take months, years." Eleanor played her card. "Or I could make it worth your while to forget them." "How?" "My father left more than just medical knowledge." She lied smoothly. "There's gold hidden near the old shop, enough to make you rich, let you start over somewhere else." Greed warred with revenge in Harlan's expression. "Show me." "Not until I have your word you'll leave the Navajo alone." "You're hardly in a position to negotiate." Eleanor shrugged. "Then kill me. The gold stays hidden, and you spend years chasing shadows through canyon country while your men desert and your money runs out." She saw the moment greed won. "Fine. Show me this gold, and I'll consider letting the savages rot in peace." They rode back toward the ruins of Bitter Creek, Eleanor leading them along a specific route. As they entered a narrow canyon, she caught the flash of sunlight on metal high above. Her people were in position. "Where's this gold?" Harlan demanded as they dismounted near a cluster of rocks. "Close," Eleanor said, moving toward a specific formation. "My father marked it with—" The attack came swift and silent. Arrows whistled from the canyon walls. Harlan's men, caught in the open, scrambled for cover, but the Navajo had chosen their ground well. "You witch!" Harlan snarled. Reaching for Eleanor, she was already moving, diving behind the rocks as gunfire erupted. The battle was fierce but brief, trapped in the canyon with enemies above. Harlan's men had no chance. When the dust settled, only Harlan remained, wounded but alive, dragged before Cale and the warriors. "You should have stayed in prison," Cale said coldly. "Go ahead," Harlan spat blood. "Murder me like the savage you are." Eleanor stepped forward. "No, that's what you would do." She looked at Cale. "We're better than that." "He'll never stop hunting us," Cale warned. "Then we make sure he can't." Eleanor knelt beside Harlan, checking his wounds with clinical detachment. "You'll live, but that leg will never be the same. You'll walk with a limp, never ride properly again." She met his hate-filled gaze, a fitting end for a man who lived by violence. "This isn't over," Harlan ground out. "Yes, it is." Colonel Webb emerged from behind the rocks, accompanied by a squad of cavalry. Eleanor had sent word to him, the final piece of the plan. "Marshal Harlan, you're under arrest for escape, murder of federal guards, and violation of treaty agreements." Harlan's face went white. "You planned this, all of it." "Justice," Eleanor said simply, "the kind you denied others." As the soldiers led Harlan away, he turned back one last time. "You've chosen to live with animals. You'll regret it." Eleanor took Cale's hand. "The only thing I regret is not choosing sooner." They watched the cavalry disappear into the distance. The threat was over, but Eleanor knew the challenges would continue. There would always be those who couldn't accept their union, their life. "You could have killed him," Maria Bigay said, approaching. Many would have. I'm a healer, Eleanor replied. I have seen enough death. The clan mother studied her for a long moment, then removed a necklace from her own neck, a string of silver and turquoise. Old and precious. You are Navajo now, she said formally. Not by blood, but by choice, by courage, by love. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears as Maria placed the necklace around her neck. Thank you. No, thank you. Maria's weathered face softened. For reminding us that bridges between peoples are possible. Difficult, yes, but possible. That night, the village celebrated. Eleanor sat by the fire, surrounded by her new family, watching Cale tell the story of their escape to wide-eyed children. He caught her eye and smiled, that private smile that still made her heart race. Any regrets? Neil asked, sitting beside her. Eleanor thought of her old life, the loneliness, the careful boundaries, the constant fear of being truly seen. Then she looked at what she had now loved: family, purpose, freedom to be herself fully. No, she said firmly, no regrets. As the fire burned low and the stars emerged, Cale came to her side. Happy? More than I ever thought possible. He pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder. Around them, the village settled into peaceful sleep. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There was still much to learn, bridges to build between their worlds. Eleanor had ideas about teaching some of the young people basic medical skills, about documenting traditional healing practices, about creating something new from the blend of their cultures. But tonight, there was just this: the warmth of the fire, the vast sky above, and the man beside her who'd seen her truly from the beginning. Close your eyes, Cale murmured, echoing her words from so long ago. This time, Eleanor did, trusting completely. She felt his lips brush her forehead, heard him whisper something in Navajo that she'd learned meant my heart, my life. Forever, she whispered back, in his language. And in the hidden valley where two worlds met and love had conquered fear, they held each other as the fire burned down to embers. The stars wheeled overhead, silent witnesses to a love that had defied every obstacle, crossed every boundary, and emerged stronger for the testing. Eleanor had started as a lonely healer in a harsh land. She'd become a warrior for love, a bridge between peoples, a woman who'd found her true self in the most unexpected place. And Cale, the wounded warrior she'd saved, had saved her in return from isolation, from a life half-lived, from the fear of being truly known. Their story would be told around fires for generations, growing into legend, but for now, it was simply their truth. Two people who'd looked past surface differences to find the soul beneath, who'd risked everything for love and won a life neither could have imagined alone. In the morning, they would rise and face the world together. But this moment, this perfect, peaceful moment, was theirs alone. And it was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Thank you so much for joining me on Eleanor and Cale's incredible journey through the Wild West. Their story reminds us that love can bloom even in the harshest conditions, and that true courage means standing up for what's right, even when the whole world stands against you. I'd love to hear from you. Please comment below and let me know where in the world you're listening to this story. It's amazing how these tales of the American frontier can touch hearts across the globe. Share your thoughts about Eleanor and Cale's romance, and what part of their journey moved you the most. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Wild West Tales for more passionate tales of love, adventure, and courage in the Old West. Don't forget to hit that like button and press the hype button to help more listeners discover this epic love story. Your support means the world and helps keep these tales of the untamed frontier alive. Until our next adventure, partners, keep your hearts wild and your spirits free.